everybody set?
Yeah.
Audio rolling, all that good stuff? Take it away.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for being here today. As you know, the legislature is discussing this week on how to use Wisconsin's $977 million surplus. I want to start by reminding everyone that this is a projected surplus based on some pretty rosy assumptions, and we're only 6 months into a 2-year budget cycle. We know that 2013 was a record year in the stock market, and as a result, 75% of the states across the country are seeing these projected surpluses. In just the first 5 weeks of this year, we've already seen how volatile the stock market can be and how quickly these rosy assumptions can go away. That's why I find Governor Walker's proposal for this projected surplus so irresponsible. He is spending money we don't have yet. And at a time when you can see from this chart, we have a large number of financial obligations that we're going to have to meet as a state. That means that after they spend the projected surplus, we won't have paid down any of our record high debt, nor will we have addressed the shortfalls that we face. I don't know too many Wisconsin families who rush out to spend money they don't have yet when they've already racked up debt and they have more bills coming due. But I find it even more irresponsible considering that we've already added $1.2 billion in debt under Walker's administration, and we have significant commitments coming due. Put simply, Walker's approach is to borrow and spend, and it's left us in a weaker position financially while we continue to lag the nation in job creation. This graphic shows how the projected surplus compares to the upcoming financial obligations Wisconsin already has. Our structural deficit heading into the next biennium would be $825 million under Walker's plan. We've also put off paying $957 million in transportation projects, and in part because Walker turned down federal funding, we have a hole of $92 million in Medicaid. These are significant commitments that we as a state already have, and Scott Walker's borrow and spend approach isn't going to improve the state's finances, and it's not going to create the jobs for middle-class families that we need. My top priorities as governor will be making sure that folks have good paying jobs by supporting small business growth and making sure that workers have the education and the skills to fill them. That means first and foremost, investing in job training programs that prepare Wisconsin workers to fill today's manufacturing, healthcare, and information technology jobs. And second, we have to help small businesses grow. But we can't do these critically important things if we don't get our fiscal house in order. And Walker's irresponsible plan for the projected surplus would actually leave the state in worse financial shape than we are today. Here's what I'd do. First and foremost is use half of the projected surplus to pay down the debt and bolster our rainy day fund so that we enter the next budget in a stronger position. We have to start paying our bills before we put more on the credit card. Second, I'd target property tax towards the middle class through first dollar credit. This is about fairness, and we'll make sure that homeowners get more bang for the buck than they would under Walker's plan. Our economy grows when we grow and strengthen the middle class. Finally, I agree we need to put dollars towards worker training that prepare people looking for jobs so that they have the skills right now. But Walker's cuts to worker training and technical colleges over the last 3 years have put us in a weaker position. In his State of the State, Scott Walker said, "The economy is dramatically better and our finances are in great shape." Scott Walker may believe that, but I know there's a lot more we have to do to give every middle-class family a fair shot and to grow jobs while being fiscally responsible. Wisconsin has everything we need to have a top 10 thriving economy in the country, but what we lack is the leadership to get it done. It's time to put problem solving ahead of election year politics. Thanks. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mary, are you looking to do something similar to what the Democrats in the Assembly have proposed in terms of using this money in different ways to do the first dollar credit instead of the technical college credit? I mean, do you have a specific detailed plan, or are you just talking in generalities?
No, this is specific. I mean, taking half of the money and using that towards paying down the debt and bolstering the rainy day fund, and then the other half, I would skew it much more heavily towards the property tax relief, the first dollar credit, along with some of that money to the worker training. But I'd want to see what proposals there are for worker training to make sure not just putting more money out there, but actually look at how that money is going to be spent, making sure that it is targeted towards immediately improving job skills and matching those with the jobs that are open.
So just to be clear, is it, when you say half, I mean, they're proposing using $500 million in the next biennium or in each year of the next biennium for this first dollar credit. Are you saying, let's do that? Are you saying, let's do $500 million in this biennium? What are you specifically suggesting?
No, I'd use it in this biennium. Out of the 977, half, I think that's 485, 489, somewhere around 490 million, and that would be in this biennium. I want to make sure that homeowners are able to get that relief as soon as we can put that into the property tax bills.
And then in the worker training piece is a $35 million proposal. It's one-time money. Are you supporting the governor's proposal for using that one-time money for worker training, or are you looking for some additional funding for that? What specifically are you looking for?
I think that is a good start. As I said, you know, Walker cut $71 million from our technical colleges in his first budget. I don't think that we can make that up, but this as a one-time effort to support immediate job training efforts in this biennium would certainly go a long way.
Of the remaining money, do you split that evenly between the rainy day fund and paying down debt, or how do you split that?
I'd be much more heavily oriented towards paying down the debt, because we're paying interest on that debt, and obviously the more that we can pay down, the more it reduces our interest costs.
And have you run the figures on what your plan would result in an opening structural deficit for the next budget?
No, I haven't, but it certainly wouldn't be going up. Under Governor Walker's plan, the structural deficit is increasing by $100 million. So I would not have an increase in the structural deficit.
Mary, what about schools? In the past, you've criticized what you call record cuts from education. Would you use any of this money for public schools, or are you switching to job training as the focus?
Well, I think what I'm doing is putting us in a good position in terms of the next budget, so that we are able to look at how we can increase funding for education. Certainly in Walker's budget, he had proposed no increase in K-12 funding at all, and no increase in the cap. The compromise was that $75 per student. But going forward, we have to make sure that our public schools are adequately funded, and I think that if we use this projected surplus wisely, and again, it's a projected surplus, I don't think we should get ahead of ourselves and make these commitments that are actually, if these surplus does not come true, puts us in a bigger hole. But if we set ourselves up to have a strong budget in the next time, then we can look at how we adequately fund the schools.
A couple of polls have shown the majority of people surveyed have supported this tax cut. So how do you convince them? I mean, they're looking at money in their own pockets. How do you convince them, I guess, that what you're pointing out here is, I guess, a bad scenario if the stock market does go down or we do have some fiscal difficulties?
What I'm hearing from people is actually they appreciate a fiscally responsible approach, and it doesn't make sense to people to go out and spend money before we have it. Through that property tax relief, and especially if you're using the first dollar credit, the credit to homeowners, that tax cut will be larger than what it is under Walker's plan. So it combines being fiscally responsible, making sure we're not spending money before we're having it, making sure we're not borrowing and spending it, but in essence is able to still have that property tax relief.
Joint Finance Chair John Nygren kind of said, you know, when she was Commerce Secretary, they really didn't have surpluses. So, you know, it's interesting that she's commenting on what to do with the surplus. How would you respond to that, I guess?
Well, I have a 30-year track record. While it was 2 years at the Commerce Department, I guess that leaves 28 years in the private sector of balancing budgets and actually knowing how you do that and how you forecast the future to have a balanced budget going forward as well. And so I use that experience both as an executive at Trek Bicycle, along within the nonprofit sector, to figure out what is fiscally responsible.
Why are you calling this a rosy projection when it's coming from the Legislative Fiscal Bureau, which by all accounts is a nonpartisan agency? Why is this a rosy projection?
Because it's based off of 2013, and 2013 was a record year for the stock market. That affects not only income tax collections, but sales tax collections. These are projections which, it wasn't that long ago that the budget was done. And if you look at how much those projections have changed, it leads to the same question about couldn't they just change as quickly going back the other way, especially given the first 5 weeks of 2014 and the stock market.
Anybody over on this side of the room?
So we're talking about obviously hypotheticals as to what you do here, but given that you have said this is about 6 months into a biennium, I mean, if you were in this position right now, would you even be doing anything with this surplus, or would you want to wait a little bit longer to see how some of those collections match up with the actual projections?
Well, I think by first of all using half of it to pay down debt and bolster the rainy day fund, it provides you with that buffer so that if there are changes in projections, you'd be able to adapt to that.
The speaker, Robin Voss, talked about that there are constitutional issues potentially, or Fiscal Bureau's about constitutional issues with the first dollar credit, because it doesn't apply to every property the same. For example, certain farmland wouldn't be counted. So do you have any response to that criticism that there's constitutional questions about the first dollar credit?
Well, it has been used before, but certainly if there are constitutional issues, those need to be addressed. But I think the fact that it's been used before would indicate that that doesn't apply.
Let's do one more.
Obviously, you're focusing here on the structural deficit, but you also have a transportation fund deficit that's been kind of pushed out by Walker. Do you have any plans yet as to how to deal with that, or are you still formulating that?
I will look at every option. We have to make sure that going forward that Wisconsin is dealing with this shortfall. And what Walker has done is basically kick the can down the road by borrowing all this money. And so increasing our debt by $1.2 billion is not the way to be dealing with these issues. So I would look at make sure we had all options on the table and look at which are the best ones to fund this going forward.
Would that include a gas tax increase potentially?
I would look at all the options going forward, but as I've said before, I plan to hold the line on taxes.
Thanks, guys.